Hi, welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about the ongoing problems in the Russian economy and another shock decision that was announced by the Bank of Russia, which really highlights just how serious the problems in the economy are becoming. But before we get into the details on all of that, could I ask anybody that hasn't subscribed yet to please hit that subscribe button? Really helps me with the algorithm and also puts a smile on my face. Now, on the 24th of April, the Bank of Russia announced that it was cutting interest rates again, this time from the previous level of 15% to the new level of 14.5%. And this cut has not been a one-off decision. This is actually the 8th consecutive interest rate cut that Russia has introduced since May of last year. 8 cuts in 11 months. So this is not a minor adjustment, this is a very clear trend. And whenever you see a central bank making repeated moves like this, it tells you something very important is going on in the economy. But before we analyse what this means for Russia, let's take a step back and talk briefly about the theory of interest rates. Because interest rates are the single most important tool that central banks have to manage their economies, particularly when it comes to the thorny issue of inflation. The general rule is very simple. If inflation is too high, if it's above your target level, then you increase interest rates. Now, why would you do that? Because higher interest rates make borrowing more expensive. If you want to take out a loan, it's more costly. And that means that businesses are less likely to take out loans to invest, and consumers are also less likely to take out loans to spend. So demand across the economy starts to fall because businesses and consumers have got less money, they're not spending as much, and so it goes down. And when demand falls, prices tend to come down. That's the theory. Now, the opposite is also true. If the economy is weak or slowing down, then central banks generally cut interest rates because lower rates make borrowing cheaper, and that encourages businesses to borrow and therefore invest more, consumers to take on debt and spend more, and demand in the economy increases across the board. So in simple terms, when you have high inflation, you tend to increase rates. When your economy is weak, you cut rates. That's how it's supposed to work. Now let's apply that to Russia, because if we look at what's been happening with interest rates, you can see this chart behind me for anybody that's been missing the charts. I'm reintroducing them, so hopefully this will keep you happy, put a smile on your face. And what you can see is that since May of 2025, Russia has cut interest rates in 8 consecutive times. So based on that theory, you would expect that inflation is now under control. You would expect that inflation has fallen back to the target rate that the Russian central bank has set, because otherwise, why would you keep cutting rates? But here's the problem. That's not what's been happening. If we look at what's going on with inflation, and again, you can see the chart behind me here. Now, just to remind you, Russia's target rate of inflation is 4%. It's double what it is in economies like the USA and the UK, where it's 2%. And that's because the Russian economy is struggling. It's not going to get anywhere near 2%, so it's gone for 4%. So that's what the central bank would like inflation to be. But as you can see from this chart, which shows the situation over the past 5 years, inflation hasn't been anywhere near 4%. It's been above 4% in every single month since July of 2023. And actually, the very brief period when it did come down below 4%, nobody can really explain that. It doesn't really make any sense. So we're talking about almost 3 years of persistently high official level of inflation. I think it's probably longer than that. And the latest data that we have for March 2026 shows that inflation over the past 12 months is sitting at 5.9%. So that's almost 50% higher than the official target. If that was happening in other economies, then the banks would be taking serious action. And if we just think about that for a moment, inflation is still significantly above target in Russia, and yet the central bank is continuing to cut interest rates, not just for 1 month, but 8 times in the last 11 months. Now that doesn't make any sense based on traditional economic theory, because cutting rates should stimulate demand and potentially push inflation even higher. So why is the Russian central bank doing this? Well, to understand that, you have to have a look at what's actually happening inside the Russian economy, because Russia is no longer operating like a normal economy. Over the last few years, it's effectively transitioned to a wartime economy. We've talked about this many times before. What does that actually mean? It means that a huge proportion of government spending, investment, and economic activity is now being directed towards supporting the war effort in Ukraine. So defense companies, military suppliers, and related industries have been booming. It's been happy days for those guys. They've been receiving massive amounts of funding from the Kremlin. They've been hiring workers aggressively, and they've been pushing up wages to attract staff. So in that part of the economy, things actually look quite strong. You've got rising wages, high employment, and guaranteed revenues. But unfortunately for Russia, that's only a small part of the story, because outside of that military-focused sector, the real economy is struggling badly. Ordinary businesses in Russia have been hit hard by the sanctions. They've lost access to international markets, they've lost customers, they've lost supply chains, and in many cases, they've lost their profitability. They're making losses. So what you've effectively got is a two-speed economy. On one side, government-supported industries that are doing fantastically well. On the other side, the vast majority of businesses that are struggling to survive. And this is where the interest rate cuts have come in, because interest rates in Russia, even after this latest cut, are still sitting at 14.5%, which is an extremely high level. And at those levels, borrowing is prohibitively expensive. Most businesses simply can't afford to take on loans at those rates. And consumers just simply aren't going to borrow to spend when you're paying more than 14.5% to do so. So what's happening is that demand in the real economy is collapsing. People aren't spending, businesses aren't investing, and economic activity outside of the state-supported sectors is grinding to a halt. So the Bank of Russia is in a very difficult position. On the one hand, inflation is still way too high, but on the other hand, the economy is weakening, and the high interest rates are making that weakness worse. So they've made a decision. They've decided that supporting the economy is now more important than controlling inflation. And that's why they're cutting rates. But this is where things get even more interesting, because if you look at what's been happening to the Russian ruble, you might expect that with high inflation and rate cuts, the currency would be weakening. That's what basically would be happening anywhere else in the world, because high inflation erodes purchasing power and lower interest rates tends to reduce demand for your currency. But that's not what we've seen in Russia. In fact, the ruble has actually been relatively strong. And again, that doesn't make any sense at all. But the reason for that is that the currency is no longer freely floating in a normal market environment. There are capital controls in place, there are restrictions on money flowing out of the country, and there are artificial supports being applied to maintain its stability. So once again, what we're seeing in Russia is not normal market-driven outcomes. It's being heavily influenced and in many cases controlled by government policy. So when you put all of this together, what does it tell us? Well, it tells us that the Russian economy is under significant strain. The headline numbers might not look disastrous. You've got certain sectors performing well. You've got a relatively stable currency. But underneath the surface, there are serious structural problems. You've got persistent inflation, you've got a weak real economy, you've got heavy reliance on government spending, and you've got a central bank that is now cutting rates, not because inflation is under control, far from it, but because the economy needs support. And that is a very important distinction, because when a central bank starts prioritising growth over inflation control, despite inflation still being at elevated levels, that's usually a sign that something is breaking. So this latest rate cut from 15% to 14.5% isn't just another routine adjustment. It's a signal. It's a signal that the pressure inside the Russian economy is building, and it raises a big question for the months ahead. How far can they keep cutting rates? Because if they continue to reduce rates, they run the risk of inflation running even higher. But if they stop cutting or even raise rates again, they risk putting even more pressure on an already struggling real economy. So the Bank of Russia and the Russian economy are walking a tightrope right now, and it's not going to be easy to navigate over the next 3 to 6 months. So I'll keep you posted on any further news and developments as and when they occur. Hopefully you found today's video useful, informative, and most importantly, thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, or maybe you didn't like it but you thought it was interesting, then please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Don't forget, I'm currently running my competition where you can win my property or a cash alternative prize. That competition is coming to an end soon, and I've got some really interesting news that I'll be posting shortly about the property, so watch out for that. But if you'd like to get involved, it's a fun way of funding the channel. Scan the QR code on the screen now or click the link in the description below. Got some great offers on the go right now. Thank you also to everyone that's supporting me in other ways. If you bought me a coffee or sent me YouTube super thanks or signed up as a patron or a member, thank you so much for that support. I really appreciate it. Helps to keep me focused and making as many videos as possible. Don't forget the Joe and Naz channel is now live. This channel is designed to put a smile on your face. We're bringing food, fun and banter to YouTube, and hopefully you can help us with that journey. We're still a little bit short of YouTube's metrics in terms of earning any money, so if you could go and subscribe to the channel and watch some of the videos, that would be fantastic. We do have a membership scheme live and super thanks are enabled, but we're not earning anything at all from advertising revenue, so we'll keep plugging away and keep going, but if you could assist us, that would be brilliant. Our latest video has just been released and it's a fun one. We went to try out a full Irish breakfast in Dublin, which is different to a full English. So if you want to find out what the differences are, then check out the video. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. If you'd like to go, just click the link at the end of today's video. You'll see the link to that video. Just click into that. It'll take you straight in there. But in the meantime, here's something to put a smile on your face.